Hello, welcome. Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today we start Unit 22 Globalization, Privatization and Indigenous Knowledge. Another important aspect of globalization, the indigenous knowledge system and the impact of global measures to protect the interest of patents on the indigenous knowledge will be discussed in this unit. WTO and developed countries argue that the compulsory imposition of TRIPS is done with the aim of checking piracy and to give protection to innovative inventions. But many a time this can go against the interest of indigenous laypersons, common knowledge, especially in the developing countries. Let us see how it can happen. In May 1995, the US Patent Office granted a patent to the University of Mississippi Medical Center of Turmeric for its wound healing capability. The implication of this is that if you are found using turmeric for wound healing without permission or payment, you are liable to prosecution. It is an absurd situation for millions of Indians who have been using turmeric for centuries to even to imagine that one has to pay royalty for use of turmeric or to imagine that it is a new invention. The patent was challenged by a watchful Indian scientist, Dr. R.A. Mashalekar, who took up many issues related to intellectual property right (IPR) and brought awareness on little realized dangers in the IPR regimes and World Trade Organization (WTO) practices. After nearly 4 months of contesting the patent, it was established that the use of turmeric for healing purposes was well known in India. The patent was annulled, but this was not the only traditional or indigenous knowledge and practice which was nearly appropriated for commercial use and for profit. Mexican beans, South Asian basmati, Bolivian quinoa, Amazonian ayashka, West Africa sweet jenny, among many others, all have been subject to intellectual property claims that are predatory on the knowledge and genetic resources of the indigenous people and farming communities. Big multinational companies and pharmaceutical companies are constantly on the lookout to tap knowledge and products for commercial and profit-making purposes. Patents, which are meant to protect the creative and innovative efforts, are being increasingly used to have exclusive right on what many times has been a common knowledge of a community or a tradition. Brazil, which has the world's richest biodiversity, has attracted many companies, and it is believed that more than half of the plant species in the rainforest of the Brazil have been patented. As we can see, to be not able to use neem or turmeric because it has been patented by a private company for commercial purposes is truly illogical for those of us who are familiar with the use of neem or turmeric in our everyday life. The discovery of the healing properties of these two plant species cannot be attributed to any one single person, such that the person can apply for a patent. It is knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation, and nobody has exclusive right over this knowledge. So, what has changed? Why has common property and knowledge become exclusive? In what way are traditional communities and indigenous population affected by patent laws, which allow exclusive rights over knowledge or products? What has globalization or WTO anything to do with it? Let us see whether some of these questions can be answered in this unit. To understand some of these questions and many more, we need to see the issue of patents and indigenous knowledge within the backdrop of globalization and the economic dimensions and implications of globalization. So, we will start the unit by trying to recapitulate some of the basic features of the globalization in terms of its free trade and liberalization. We will subsequently look at the world bodies such as WTO, which regulate some of the functioning of free trade through regimes such as TRIPS, etc. Following this, we will examine the patents regime and the implications it has for people who do not believe in private ownership or exclusive rights such as the indigenous people. We will also try and understand the alternatives available and strategies as well as the response of the poorer third world countries and by the indigenous communities of the various aspects of patent laws and philosophy. Now let us move to the next topic, globalization, liberalization and free trade. There are several aspects to the process of globalization which we have discussed in detail. The unit which is on socio-economic and cultural dimension of globalization has also pointed out that while scholars may define globalization in different ways, they all do agree that the present process and phenomena points to an increasing intensity of flow between goods, people and finances, among many other things. The intensity of interaction is such that the events in one place are affected by the processes taking place many miles away and vice versa. Globalization brought about the internationalization of economic activities, especially with the US and UK taking to greater interest in market coordination during 1980s. There are greater emphasis on private enterprise during the Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher's regime in US and UK respectively. During this period, there were more export-oriented economies due to the recommended path by the international funding bodies such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF and the World Bank. Since then, there has been a substantial growth in the world trade. Consequently, international bodies such as the World Bank, IMF and WTO have become very powerful, who constantly recommended lesser government and state involvement and more free flow of goods and finances. With increasing pressure from world monetary and trade organizations, many states succumbed to the pressure to liberalize their economies. With the collapse of the Soviet Russia, an alternative model for free enterprise was found to be unviable, and so more and more nations became integrated into a global network of free trade. Many governments took to shrinking public expenditure on capital and social sectors such as on health, education, housing, public distribution system, rural infrastructure development, etc. In that sense, there has been globalization of national policies and policy making mechanisms of national governments. India too took steps to liberalize its economy following a crisis in the 1990s. The two central components of the neoliberal policies adopted by Indian government have been the liberalization of India's private sector and a reform of the public sector. Thus, India took to liberalization, which essentially meant that many of the activities which the state performed were reduced, whether it is centralized price control or monopoly over infrastructure and public services. The IMF and World Bank started insisting on the deregulation of national economies and liberalization in trade and investment sector as conditions for the grant of financial assistance or loans to countries world over. They advocated free trade, which in modern usage means trade or commerce carried on without such restrictions as import duties, export bounties, domestic production subsidies, trade quotas, or import licenses. Not only did India adopt Structural Adjustment Program SAP on the behest of the IMF World Bank, but also adopted privatization. Privatization essentially involved the state selling out its assets to private ownership. Another aspect of globalization has been the involvement of foreign direct investment FDI, which is money invested by a foreign party that is rewarded with the part ownership of the production. This is done through the different forms of the collaborations. In 1990, there has been phenomenal growth in the collaborations between the companies across countries, and FDI grew substantially all over the world. There is a general view that FDI flows help the economy in several ways, one of them being transfer of technology. As we have already learnt, with the increase in the rate of the transfer of technologies at the national and the international level, the question of patent protection became significant. Though there were effective rules and regulations in individual countries, and international policy accepted by all the countries was not there. With the increased interaction and technology transfer during the heightened pace of the globalization, it became important to have an international policy agreement by most of the nations around the globe on the issue of the patent protection. This is what WTO tried to impose through the implementation of the trade-related intellectual property rights TRIPS. TRIPS came into effect in 1995. It imposes minimum standards in the 7 areas of intellectual property, that is the patent, copyright, trademarks, geographical indication, industrial design, and undisclosed information, trade secrets, and covers diverse areas as computer programming and circuit designing, pharmaceutical, and the transgenic crops. TRIPS was devised based on the standards of the North and conflicts with the national interest and needs of the third world countries. For instance, most third world countries previously exempted medicines, agriculture, and other products from national patent laws, but with TRIPS, almost all knowledge-based production is subject to tight intellectual property protection. Third world nations have to adjust their laws to conform to TRIPS by 2000, and the least developed countries by 2016. The latter will be confronted with the severe financial and administrative constraints. Although the positive effects of TRIPS on the South have been touted by the North, in terms of technology transfer, foreign direct investment, and research and development R&D innovations. There is some evidence of this taking place. In fact, the strengthening and expansion of intellectual property rights IPRs will affect the access to and use of technologies and the third world prospect for industrial and technological development. Stronger IPR mean higher cost in terms of royalties and other payments and reduced resources available for local R&D. Scientific and technological protectionism is a growing problem as the increasing economic relevance of scientific research limits the free dissemination of research results and constrains the traditional openness of the university laboratories. Since most basic research is conducted in the north, this will reduce the third world's prospects of improving their social and economic conditions. At this stage, we must be wondering what are the IPRs and TRIPS. To understand the various aspects of these regimes, let us look at the world bodies such as WTO to start with and how some of the regulating mechanisms of trade have evolved over the years in the next lecture. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.